From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle?
Well, back in the studio after our last couple of recordings on the big stage.
Yeah, so just
Sydney.
reporting with a guest, not in front of 400 people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a different vibe.
It is. I do feed off the energy of the audience a little bit. It'd be nice. Maybe we need to get like our colleagues into the studio and they can like laugh and cheer, and
I'm sure they would appreciate that, and it would be a great use of everyone's time.
yeah, for the vibe.
For the vibe.
For the vibe. I think it's a worthwhile investment.
I don't think there's enough of them there to constitute an audience, though.
Yeah, we probably need to do like a work from office mandate or something like that to make sure more people are in here to give us more vibe.
Fly everybody over from interstate.
Yeah,
That'd do it.
Yeah, we get a lot of it. That
Get the
would make
devs
it,
in as well.
Yeah, they love a good laugh.
They sure do. And there's nothing the devs love more than listening to our podcast.
Yeah, and
They're all over that.
and interacting with people.
Yeah,
Like,
they're definitely down with that. No, look, some of the devs do enjoy interacting with people.
okay.
We shouldn't cast that wider net.
Yeah, which ones?
Anna and Adam.
I think. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But that's it.
Well, I don't know about Scott.
No.
No? Okay.
Well, we can ask him, but I've got product meeting later today. I can ask him, but I'm
All
pretty
right.
sure.
Watch this space, listeners. You'll hear back as to whether Scott also enjoys interacting with people or not.
I am betting it's highly unlikely. Yeah. But look, this is a show not about our team members, but
Sometimes it's a little bit about them.
maybe we should do an episode just on our team members.
Intro to the Flourish DX team.
Yeah, we got some weirdos, but we love them.
Well, everyone's a weirdo once you get a little bit under
I mean,
the
you once
surface.
claimed that I was a weirdo. I
Shocking.
still don't get it.
That's just gross slander.
I know, right? It'll come up in your performance review.
Because we have those.
We do.
I've never had a performance review since I've
That's
been
more
here.
me. Joelle, please don't leave me. Please stay. That's your performance review.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Our guest is waiting.
Yes.
Very patiently.
Yep. And she's in the US, so
Okay.
it's getting towards her bedtime, I think.
Yeah, it is getting late. So this person has held VP and SVP level roles focusing on purpose-driven areas such as health, safety and environment, sustainability and risk management at Amazon, PepsiCo, Novartis and Netflix. She now offers leadership development and consulting services to help companies and purpose-driven leaders create lasting impact. She is a twice published author with a new third book forthcoming. She is the CEO and founder at Purpose Pathfinders. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Megan Tranter. Welcome, Megan.
Hi, Jason. Thank you.
That's quite a resume.
Oh, thank you. I was just thinking you've set this really high bar after talking about what it was like in most recent times, and now you're here back in the studio. So I hope we don't disappoint.
Well, the last person we interviewed for the podcast was Adam Grant. Yeah.
No pressure.
Yeah, it's not a hard one to follow at all.
No. But for the listeners who were not at our conference, the Adam Grant episode won't air until January. So it'll only be the people who were at the conference.
So your episode, like chronologically when we release it, will not come directly after Adam Grant's.
No.
It's just that we're recording this in real time,
Yep.
straight after doing Adam Grant's interview. But I'm sure this will be just as good.
Yes.
Well, I'm hoping it is. No pressure.
Well, thank you.
What podcast do you like to listen to, Megan?
Oh, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, weren't we? Because I felt this little bit of pressure. Should I really reveal the podcast that I really listen to, or should I talk about the ones that people think I should talk about? So I won't reveal them all. But I tell you the one that I absolutely love, and I know it's a massive one, and it's Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO. Have you watched that one as well?
Yeah. And I've recently listened to his audiobook as well, which is terrific. Yeah.
Oh, I haven't listened to that.
Oh, there you go. Something new to listen to. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really on podcasts, I'm really into personal development and easy listening type of podcasts. And actually, I even listen to podcasts going to sleep, although I don't know if others do this. It's sort of a little bit of white noise, I guess. But then it gets a little bit annoying when your AirPod beeps, after a couple of hours telling you that the battery's run out.
Yeah, my wife's got a bad habit. She needs the TV on or some background noise on to be able to get to sleep. So good thing she's usually asleep by about 9:30, which means that I can...
I wish I could be asleep by 9:30.
Well, she's up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock.
Yeah. No, that's...
You don't want to do that.
No,
yeah, you have to have both. Right.
I would like to be able to go to bed at 9:30 and wake up at 7. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that's a lot of sleep.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring this up is she likes listening to true crime Netflix series. And I'm like, that's the worst thing to listen to just before going to sleep.
Really facilitating some lovely dreams and good quality sleep. Yeah.
But I get the whole white noise thing. It is annoying as a spouse when your partner's like watching true crime or having it on in the background when you're also trying to get to sleep. So,
yeah, my husband uses earbuds for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll give their advice. I'll say Megan suggested that she try that.
Earbuds, yeah.
Earbuds.
Mm.
And after you do it for a while, you get used to taking the one out that doesn't have battery anymore and then finding the other one and putting that in for the rest of the night.
The muscle memory, yeah. That's a good trick.
Yeah, you keep it going all night.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. She just needs it to get to sleep and then she's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Megan, tell us about your professional career, please.
Well, I have a really interesting career, I think, anyway. And I think it'll be interesting to your listeners, especially perhaps the Australians, because I've lived in the US now for the past 21 years. But when people hear me talk, they often can't believe it because obviously the accent never left. And I find it quite funny. People often say, "Where are you from?" And I say, "Seattle." And then they look at me very strangely like, "Pardon? Where are you really from?" And then I have to relay the story back to them. But from a professional point of view, I've actually been working in health and safety now for 31 years. I really don't even like saying the number sometimes because it feels like such a long time. But actually, I'm one of those folks who started working in environment, health and safety straight out of university. I went to QUT, obviously over in Brisbane in Queensland, and studied. And then my first couple of jobs were super technical. So I worked as a government inspector and an occupational or industrial hygienist. I looked after things like farm safety or rural safety, did quite a few serious incident investigations and prepared evidence for prosecution. Then I went to the mining department. So walking along the long wall of underground coal mines and above ground in silica mines and metalliferous mines and all sorts of interesting places. And then I actually went into academia and was a university lecturer for 4 years. I taught undergraduate degrees and master's degrees in Australia and Hong Kong, which actually was pretty cool doing that. And then, one day I said to myself, I need to get a real job. And I say that with inverted commas because, of course, the jobs I had were good, but I didn't feel like it was a real job. So that really started my journey into working as an environment, health and safety professional in pretty large companies. So I worked at places like McDonald's Australia, Coca-Cola Amatil. And then, as I said, 21 years ago, I moved to the US and began working in big names, as you mentioned before, places like PepsiCo, Amazon, Novartis and Netflix. And I think what has been amazing about that has been working in global roles. So I often still think of myself as this little girl from Australia, yet the type of places that I've been, the audiences that I've been with, talking to boards of these, now $1 trillion companies or hundreds of billions of dollars capital companies, working with senior executives, flying on the private jet around the world, all this sort of crazy stuff. Just building this most amazing career with these experiences. And, I think it goes to show that when you have a dream and, when you can figure certain things out, and of course, when you get a bit of luck and a few good breaks on the way, you can build the most amazing career in health and safety probably ever imaginable.
Amazing. And I think unusual to go straight into health and safety out of uni as well. That's usually people kind of do something else and then end up in health and safety. So that's, who said not many people go to uni wanting to be a safety advisor?
I don't know, maybe Cam Stevens or someone
Probably,
like that.
probably. Yeah. I'm also an ex-regulator.
I'm the same though. I actually never even chose the degree. It's an interesting story. When I finished high school, I was a military child. And so my dad had a different posting and we were moving from Victoria up to Queensland. And, as an 18-year-old, I didn't want to go there. So I had some other university offers, but without much money, I didn't have that many options. And so it was actually my dad that chose this course. And I remember, because back then this was the first time that Australia ever had an undergraduate degree in health and safety. And I remember going into these classes and saying to the, professors or lecturers, like, what is this? And what are we going to be called when we graduate? And they'd say, you'll be called an occupational health and safety professional. And I'm like, that's not a real job. Like, what is that? And it's been so fascinating for the last 3 decades watching the career progress, the way people think about health and safety, now the inclusion more obviously of things like psychosocial health and safety, because all those decades ago it really was not talked about very much, maybe in the context of ergonomics as a topic a little bit, but certainly not to the same extent as now. Which I think can only be good for workers and good for human beings in general.
Mm. Yeah, well, I don't think we've spoken to any health and safety professionals whose career has soared quite to the extent of getting on the private plane for Bezos and the likes. That's pretty impressive. I'm interested in your insights because, like you said, you've been living in the US now for 21 years, and I think Australia is kind of a rarity in the world in terms of the focus on health and safety for whatever reason. But we always hear that the US is lagging well behind in terms of either the priority it puts on health and safety or how well it is performing from a health and safety perspective. So do you have any insights on, where the US sits in terms of it, and particularly with some of these larger companies that you've worked with, like where does it sit in terms of its priority?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of ways of looking at it. So the type of roles that I've generally held over here have been global roles. And because they were with big companies, a lot of it was up to the company to decide the approach that it wanted to take, what its vision was, what its goals were, what its priorities were, and what was important to it. And so from that perspective, especially when you are a global company, you really can set your own standards about what is important to you. So, some of the companies that I worked for, we were doing various things, far and beyond what was required in any country's legislation or requirements, because we felt it was the right thing to do for the employees. That being said, and to answer your question, the US, I think, is certainly unique in the way it thinks about health and safety. Myself having grown up with Robin-style legislation and, being very familiar with that and a risk-based approach, similar approach to what is used in Europe and also Canada. The US focuses quite a lot on regulatory requirements. And so there are quite stringent requirements under the Health and Safety Act. But again, employers will decide the way that they will adopt those requirements, but then from a psychosocial health and safety point of view, they'll also think about that as well. I think the other big difference over here is that things like health insurance and versus workers' comp is approached a little bit differently. So you're right, it's not, places like Australia are, I don't know if you'd call it further ahead, but they certainly think about psychosocial health and safety differently than the way we think about it here in the US.
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing with, even some of the multinationals that you've listed there that you've worked with, from our experience, they're all looking at Australia having probably the most stringent requirements now for psychological health and safety, and then looking at how do they model that out across the rest of the world. Because like you said, while it might not be a requirement of, say, OSHA in the US, that, you know, they have certain things in place for psychological health and safety. In Australia, the standard is much higher. So they know if they adopt the Australian standard across the world, then they're probably going to meet most legislated requirements.
Well, and maybe another way of looking at it, Jason, is that even though Australia has regulated elements of this, even if other countries haven't regulated, they still see the value of doing certain things to build high employee engagement, high performing teams, you know, all of that sort of stuff. So perhaps it's less compliance oriented, but when workplaces and employers are thinking about, well, you know, how do I make this a great place to work? Especially, you know, I remember a few years ago, there was always this discussion about, what did they call it? The war for talent. You know, I don't know if they're using that same term anymore, but it was basically talking about, you know, how do you get the right people for the right roles and so forth. And so, you know, having a great place to work, which included various elements, you know, even things like purpose and, you know, is this somewhere that a person would be proud to work? Does it align with their goals and their values? How is the work designed? You know, all of that. I think that's all a part of the consideration that goes into becoming a great place to work, rather than necessarily needing to rely on whether something's regulated or not.
Yeah, and that argument's been there for decades, right? And a lot of the stuff that we're applying from work design principles have been known for quite some time. What we found in Australia, unfortunately, was it took, you know, the heavy hand of the regulator to be enforcing, you know, legislation for companies to actually move in a significant mass, if you like. So, yeah, it's good to see there are some, you know, there are organisations that we've been dealing with for years before the regulations came out because, like you said, they saw it was the right thing to do. It was the right way to retain and attract employees. It's the right way to build culture. But unfortunately, without legislation, we're seeing that companies aren't adopting it. But maybe it's just about us being able to provide more evidence about the benefits of this. But I'm hoping through the Australian example, with so many companies adopting it now because they have to, that we start to build a greater case for why every company around the world should be considering psych health and safety.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with it, is there? You know, there are different times and different places for doing different things. And so, you know, each country does what it thinks is right at a point in time. And often legislation does, let's say, gently nudge people and companies towards change. And I don't think it's a bad thing either. You know, I remember when even certain health and safety regimes in Australia were brought in, or different frameworks were brought in, and it just changed the way that people thought about how you assess risk, you know, rather than only looking at regulations on specific risk mitigation topics. So, yeah, I can see the value of it as well.
All right. Well, the main reason we got you on the podcast today was talk about your new book that's going to be forthcoming. So it's called Clarity in Chaos. So I'd be really interested to know, well, clearly you've written 2 books before, so you weren't so scarred from the process of writing those 2 books that it deterred you from writing a third. But what motivated you to write this third one in particular?
You know, it's such a good question. My first 2 books, the first one was published in 1999, and then the second one was published in 2004. And they were super technical books. They were books on occupational hygiene and risk management. And the first one was like 407 pages. It had a periodic table and lots of physics and chemistry calculations. And the second one was a little bit shorter, maybe it was 300 or so pages. And actually, I had been asked by my publisher now for years to write a new book about health and safety. And I'd even gone so far as putting some proposals together for them. And then I never hit the deadlines. And so I contacted them last year and I said, you know I'm supposed to be writing this new book on health and safety, but I don't want to do it anymore. I would like to write on something different. And I was at a phase of my life where I was deeply reflecting on legacy and career and what it takes to build to have a purpose-driven career and purpose-driven leadership. And so I pitched to the publisher a book about that. And actually the title is, because I always forget the full title. I've got it here because I was copy editing. The full title is Clarity in Chaos, Lead with Purpose in Disruptive Times. So the whole idea of it is to say, hey, first of all, what is purpose, and how can you align as a leader and as a person your own purpose with a career, and how do you lead that way? And then it also, because it's really speaking to leaders, it's sort of encouraging them, how can you lead? How can you redesign work so that you're leading a team, either yourself or a team, in a way that really is helping people be happy at work, healthy at work, build sustainable, long-term and fulfilling careers that, make people want to stay and want to continue their work.
Yeah, no, it's a very good topic and something that I'll probably want to read. I'm trying to consume as much as I can to be a better CEO now that our team is growing, and I'm moving beyond being an individual contributor to leading the team. Yeah, it sounds like a very good book to be reading at the moment.
Yes. Casting no aspersions on your leadership, Jason, but I would be on board with any improvements that you'd like to make.
Thanks, Joelle.
All improvements are positive.
Yeah. Even if I'm starting at a very high base.
That's it. Even though you're already absolutely killing it, you could kill it even more.
Continuous improvement.
Yeah.
For sure.
What's bigger than killing it? I don't know. All right. So, Megan, what we thought we'd do is just have a bit of a conversation about some of the key themes that you're exploring in your book. And I guess the themes that are probably most relevant to our listeners and the topic of our podcast being psychosocial safety. So what can you tell us about leadership as a lever for mental health?
I think that's a really good question. So let's start with that one, yeah. So for leadership in the realms of mental health, it's interesting that supervisors or managers have one of the biggest impacts overall on someone's health and safety, but I think also on their mental health at work. And you often hear that saying that people don't leave companies, they leave leaders. And so one of the things that I talk about in my book is how to align your own values with the company that you work with, and how when you're able to understand who you are as a person and what your own values are, and when you understand what the company's values are, then everything becomes just that little bit easy if you can get the good linkage between the two. But that might sound a little bit like, hey, are you putting all of this on the employee? Which certainly is, not the intent. But one of the things I think about is how if companies can actually design work so that and understand people as human beings, then all of us can just have a much more enjoyable experience at work and find that alignment, with what works for us. And, I think some of that, and I do talk about this in the book, is as a leader, how do you understand who your people are? One of the things I always did myself as a leader was think about people's superpowers. So rather than necessarily thinking about the things that they need to adjust and change and improve on, how can you look at someone's superpowers and really double down on those to build the most amazing team? And then when you're able to do that, then people both feel good about themselves, but also others are contributing to the team overall because they're supporting one another, and then they're, building one another up and helping one another as well. So I think that point about aligning with values, that's one of the things that I've found to be probably one of the biggest drivers of someone's experience for their employer. So, for example, I remember this example that I had when I worked for a large company, and they were doing some amazing work on, I guess, what you would call triple bottom line. The initiative was called Performance with Purpose, and it was driven by the CEO. And the whole idea of this and the legacy that the CEO wanted to leave at this company was to show that you can have a wildly successful business whilst also giving back to the world, whether it was environmental sustainability or human sustainability, thinking about your employees as well as the products that you're making and selling and the contribution that you have onto community. And I remember working for that company and just feeling so proud, because it was the type of place where you're like, wow, this is something that the CEO believes is true. And the way it trickled down then through other levels of senior leadership and management, and how everyone talked about it, and the actions that were taken, even from a business perspective, and the decisions that were taken were all around that idea and that goal that we had of performance with purpose. So I think for me, that became one of these fundamental, maybe even a changing point in my career, in understanding that there are things that a CEO can do, maybe to you, Jason, as a CEO, but, that other senior leaders can do as well, that really change the way that people can feel about working for an employer or their own business or whatever it is, and, just this longer term impact that they can have on people.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy, www.45003.org. Now back to this episode. So that probably segues nicely into the second theme that we wanted to discuss with you, which was human sustainability, right? So you've mentioned it just there, and companies are, well, hopefully, more companies are starting to think beyond just environmental sustainability to human sustainability. But I'd love to hear your take on it, and how companies can embrace that as an idea.
Yeah, the idea of human sustainability, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I can't remember the exact definition of human sustainability. I think it was coined by Deloitte a few years ago, or one of the definitions of it. But the way I think about it is how... Let me think about it, say it a different way. The way I think about it is, how can workplaces or employers give value back to employees rather than it being the other way around? So often people think, okay, this is a company, and especially if you're a publicly listed company, I've worked for many publicly listed companies, so they often put the shareholder first because they need to make a return to the shareholder if they're publicly listed. But what if instead that was switched around, and we thought, what could be the value that went to the employees and human beings, which may also include community, stakeholders for sure, employees and others, and what is it that a workplace or a company can actually give back, whether it is things like health and well-being, but also, just general contribution that we're giving back. And again, I remember, I like storytelling, and I remember one of the companies that I've worked for before really thought a lot about their brand and about how they gave back to the community. And so a lot of the things that we were doing to support the community, yes, certainly some of it in the longer term was for brand protection or reputational protection, but actually the company deeply believed, and actually when I think about it, I've worked for several companies that have done this, that they genuinely believe that part of their reason and their mission for being here is to be able to give back, as well as, take in terms of the customers and the revenue that they're bringing in and so forth. So I often think about it, human sustainability, in terms of what is it that an organisation can do that will make the lives of employees in particular, because obviously that's the area I've been working in for so long, how can they make it better for them? And certainly there's different ways of thinking about that, isn't there? There's the stock standard ways, which might be remuneration and compensation and so forth. But there are other ways, which is around, do we really understand the employees and what is important to them? And can we align the work with what is important to them so that it makes their experience working for this place, not just good, but something that they're also really proud of? And I mean, we can unpack that in lots of different ways as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, I like how you're talking about, because you've spoken there both about, or earlier about helping people to understand what their superpowers are and then trying to allow them to use more of their superpowers. But you're also then talking about, core or personal values, and then how do you make sure that the work that they're doing is aligned with that as well? Or at least they can see the connection between, maybe this small task that they're doing in a machine, but then, how does it align to a greater purpose, which I think both are really cool. So, yeah, I'd love to unpack that a bit more if you can, regarding how might a leader go about doing that.
Yeah, I think of it maybe in three ways. One way is, I did talk about values earlier, and I think that becomes a fundamental element, especially of purpose-driven work, purpose-driven leadership, purpose-driven organisations, is figuring out for both oneself and also for the organisation, why are we here and what are our values? And there's an example that I often share with, different types of workshops that I run and so forth. And it's something along the lines of, if you know that, for example, part of your values is that you like collaborating with people, you like learning from other people, then if you go to a company or an organisation that's super competitive, let's say, and is very project management oriented. So, it's less about the relationships, but it's more about delivering results, getting it done fast and just, go. That may now not be a good fit for you because, what your values are and what's important to you is not congruent or aligned with the values and the mission of the company. So as a leader, I do think it's important to understand, and it doesn't all have to be altruistic, by the way. Companies are there to make money and to contribute back. It's all there. But if people can understand and if leaders can understand their teams and what is important to them, then perhaps they can find those sweet spots of what is important to them with their values and align them there. So finding out or just even thinking through, like, what is important to me here? What are my values and who am I as a person? And then number two, what are the organizational values? And then number three, finding that linkage between them so that, one can actually get that alignment. And, I often say to people as well that, sometimes you go and work for a company and you read their culture memo or the leadership principles, or, you read all the good stuff on the website and you read their reports. You're like, yes, this is the place for me. And then you get there and you're sort of like, oh, this is not quite, gelling with me, or it's not vibing with me all that well. So, there's also that point as well to realize that you as an individual can decide whether this is the right place and whether their values align with what's important to you.
Yeah, that's something. Talking about values, it's actually really interesting that we bring this up today, because it was just over the weekend that I started to write down the first draft of what FlourishDX's values are, company values.
That question that people often ask us when we're interviewing them for a job.
Yeah, what are your values? And then we make
company values.
Yeah, we don't. So in the past, I've always pushed back against it because I see a lot of company values as just like your generic teamwork, accomplishment.
Your cereal box set of values.
Yeah. And so I've been trying over the last 5 or 6 years. Well, not trying very hard, but I didn't want to rush it. I really wanted to think about, okay, well, let's just sit in the company. Let's see who we attract into the company, and then let's see what our values should be. But now, as I'm making this transition into more of a leadership role, and I've got the team around me now, I'm just noticing we're recruiting pretty quickly, and people are coming in, and to induct them, they really need to be aware of what we stand for, right? And what are the behaviours that we want. And I think that really needs to be driven by a shared set of values that we all buy into. And so I did write my first draft over the weekend, so I will be sharing that out with the team shortly. But yeah, I think it's really important, particularly at a certain point, to really identify what it is you stand for as a company, and then making sure that at all points of the employee lifecycle, right from recruitment right through to, how do you performance manage or how do you develop people, you should be aligned to your values. So yeah, I'm glad that you cover that in your book.
Something that I sort of grapple with is that, I guess, idea of the sort of shareholder supremacy model of business, right? And the sort of fiduciary responsibility to return maximum value to shareholders, and sort of how do you balance that with the idea of sort of maintaining sustainable levels of your workforce and not, I guess we see lots of businesses engaging in really sort of extractive practices with their workforce, and, sort of the almost boom and bust approaches to, bringing loads of people in, working them till burnout, and then sort of doing mass layoffs and going back to a bare bones model, and these types of approaches, which are probably beneficial for short-term returns, and then like that connects through to the way that executives are rewarded and tenure for CEOs and those types of things. This is turning into a really rambling question.
Yeah, I'm waiting for it.
So how do we move organisations to a position where they can frame practices that are enabling of human sustainability along with that drive for shareholder profitability?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think running a business is really hard. And it often always amazed me that, each quarter that these businesses that I worked in, how they, were able to forecast the numbers and then hit the numbers or not hit the numbers as they may be. And so I think there needs to be an acknowledgement somewhere that it's not as easy as the market perhaps thinks it is. And certainly, you're speaking with someone with a doctorate but not an MBA. So I might be talking outside of my area of expertise as well. But certainly having lived that life now in these big corporate companies for several decades, it's not easy for them to do that. And you see just the different swings and shifts, the macro and the micro changes of what's impacting a business and also its business model. And so perhaps to answer your question, Joelle, and again, remember, I'm not an MBA or a big business strategist, but taking that longer term view and, for businesses to understand what it is that they're trying to achieve and being honest about that sometimes. I've worked in plenty of companies that have had to do the mass hirings and then sad, unfortunate days where people lost their jobs, and, that happened for various types of reasons. And it's awful. It's just awful when you're working in that type of environment and people that you love working with, unfortunately, their number has come up. So I don't know that there's a simple answer, but certainly, with the way that many businesses are run, they think about that. But perhaps I could go back to an example, that I gave earlier about performance with purpose, and, that didn't stop that company from needing to make business adjustments. But what it did is at least it enabled it to be thoughtful in the decisions that it was making, and that it was clear on what their true north was, what they were aspiring to achieve, and then needing to pivot and adjust with whatever conditions, economic or other conditions, came that forced them to do that. But I think it's a multi-layered question and complex, and probably something that I'm not totally equipped to answer, except to acknowledge that, this is very much the life that we're all living, especially if you work for some of those companies, the publicly listed companies, and, to believe and hope that these executives who are under enormous pressure, that they are doing the best that they can for the brand so that it does sustain and is there for the long term.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Sorry to throw you a question out of left field like that. It was just something that popped up from our the conversation that we were having.
But I think, yeah, it's also just about continuing to build the evidence base for leadership, right? Like going, well, these companies that are focused on people first rather than shareholder returns actually outperform the market, for example.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what I was getting to with like CEO tenure as well, right? Like if you're cycling through CEOs every 3 years and they've got a big performance bonus based on business profitability, then they are going to be focused on short-term profitability rather than thinking about sustainable business performance over, a 5 to 10 year period of time.
Yeah, there's a whole book on that around Alan Joyce.
No comment. All right, let's talk about culture and belonging, Megan.
Yeah, I talk about this. I don't remember what chapter in my book, but one of the sections that I talk about is knowing who you are as a person and finding a place or finding something within yourself that you can feel comfortable with that. Because once you do that, you understand that there's so much that you're giving to your team and a company when you bring your full self to work. Hopefully folks can do that. And then also just how it does really expand upon your superpowers, as I was talking about before. But I think maybe to get back to that point about culture, and especially, in the health and safety area, there's been lots of discussions about culture over the years and what that means, organisational culture or health and safety culture. One of the things that I think about is what is it within an organisation that, and for us as individuals, that makes that place unique? What are the characteristics about it that make it unique to itself and special, if you like? And then how do we understand what they are and how do we retain those to build high-performing teams? And so, when I think about the teams that I've led, and I've been, a team of one myself, and then I've led really large teams as well, one of the biggest things as a leader was actually about helping the team understand what the mission was and what the vision was of the team, and then who we are and why we were here and what were we doing, and then building the type of culture, if you like, around that. But I think, if I reference back to my book, this chapter that I've got about what's called your UVP, unique value proposition, asks readers to actually think about themselves and what is special or unique about themselves that makes them indispensable, but also add value and get joy and happiness with what they're doing because they understand who they help, which industry or what type of people they help, and then what the result is that they're trying to achieve out of it.
Yeah, and that ties into that sort of sense of meaningfulness at work, right? And it's not necessarily always about, doing a caregiving role or a first response role or something like that where the meaning is, I guess, automatic or really obvious in the work that you're doing, but also, what is it that you're potentially contributing to in terms of what that organisation is doing. And I love that story about the cleaner at NASA when the president went to do the tour and stopped and said, "Oh, what do you do here?" And he said, "I'm helping to send someone to the moon." So it is, there's definitely that sense of being connected with the broader mission of the business, even if you're not, an engineer working on the rocket or, one of the astronauts who's actually going to the moon, but you're still contributing to the success of that mission.
Yeah, and as leaders, setting that environment where people feel that as well. Because, I read that recently as well, Joelle. I don't know, why did I get onto that recently also? I don't know if it was something I read or a podcast, or it was something that I saw that as well. And, but you've got to believe, I think, that it's also leadership that really sets the tone, that helps people feel like they belong there and that they're all, rowing the boat in the same direction, if you like, for the ultimate mission. So especially with that example, clearly they all understood why they were there and what they were trying to do. And so as leaders, the more that we can help people understand that and then also create a psychologically safe place for people to contribute and to give input and so forth, the more that people will probably feel like they do have that contribution.
I think that's really important, right? Is like making it really clear for people how the work that they're doing feeds through into whatever the sort of the goals and objectives are of the organisation, and then what are the different sort of motivations or ethical connections that people make to that. I was just, as you were talking there, I was thinking about my first ever job out of undergrad when I realised I didn't want to do clinical psychology and didn't know what else to do. So my friend got me a job doing document control for an EPCM in the petroleum industry. And it started out as, I'm literally just sort of tracking different documents and where they're going within the business. But what I sort of realised probably a few months in was how core the job that I was doing was to sort of process safety performance in that business, and that like everything that I was doing was supporting the change management process around, project work to conduct maintenance or expansion on these petroleum producing facilities. And that change management and doing that sort of rigorously and making sure that the reviews were done and that everything was sort of, captured and recorded and processed the right way was just fundamental to safety performance and actually, stopping things from blowing up and killing many, many people potentially. So, and that was meaningful for me, and I went on to have a career in health and safety. I think the more that businesses can help to make those connections for people when they may feel like what they're doing isn't really all that, maybe not all that well aligned with things that are actually important to them, it certainly does make a big difference, yeah.
I love that. That's such a great example as well, because when I think about purpose and purpose-driven leadership, the role of leaders can be to help their teams and to guide them along the way of what that might look like. And it can start with something, as simple and easy as why are we here and, what is our team here to deliver? And then people can reflect on it themselves to say, okay, well, how can I contribute to that as well? And it does make people feel valued, and they'll enjoy showing up to work, each day. I reflect upon one of the chapters in my book where I was talking about what motivates people. And I don't remember the exact quote, but what this research was talking about was how people, or how it's wise to understand from employees what drives and motivates them and to meet them in the place where they get that satisfaction, not to you yourself assume that someone will, like something a certain way or whatever, but to actually to listen to people and to understand what drives them. And then that's a way to get great engagement from them as well.
Mm.
Well, the last thing that we wanted to talk to you about from your book is redesigning work as a force for good. We believe it, but it'd be great for you to further extrapolate, I guess, what you meant by that theme.
Yeah. Well, I feel like this has been our whole conversation today, hasn't it? We've talked a bit about values and purpose and what that means. And, ultimately the way I think about work is, even though it's probably nice to say that people have agency and they can choose the jobs they're in and the work they do, that's not actually reality all of the time. Sometimes you take a role where you don't have that agency, and it's up to the employer and supervisors and leaders to really design work that is understood by people, but also that links together basic things and probably also more complex things about what helps people enjoy the work that they're doing. And so in my book, a lot of the discussion is around what is purpose, how do you think about purpose, even things like how do you think about innovation and experimentation, how do you think about legacy. And when you think about someone's career, and obviously in the workplace setting, there are so many different stages that people are at in their careers and with the contributions that they're making at an organisation, that if only we understood what really drove people and made them happy in the work that they do, perhaps employers could help, even if it was a little bit, to design work in a way that aligned with them. And maybe I'll go back to the comment I made earlier about superpowers. You know, when you know about a person, when you understand who they are and you can see their superpowers and they understand their superpowers, then it's exponentially or incrementally so much more valuable for them and also for the company to leverage those superpowers than it is to try and push someone, you know, the old square peg into the round hole. Is that the saying? You know, because that's difficult sometimes. And then when you do get that congruence and that fit between a person, their values and their skills and, you know, what they enjoy doing with what the work is, it also feels so much less effortless for them. You know, and I think maybe it was Joelle who mentioned earlier about things like burnout, you know, and that's obviously a big topic of conversation that we probably won't have time to talk about today. But, you know, you often see people who say don't experience burnout and yet they are working long hours or they're doing certain things that a different person might experience burnout with. And I often wonder to myself, why is that? And, you know, you often see these examples of people who just truly have been able to match or align what they're looking for themselves with the purpose of their role and their career with what the company has to offer. And they get so much joy out of it. And then equally, you'll see someone else and everything looks good. And you're thinking, okay, you've got this and this and this, and why isn't this a good fit? And I truly believe that part of it relates back to having a clear vision yourself and understanding yourself, what is your purpose, and then trying to find that match with the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I remember seeing a clip from Roger Federer a while back talking about strengths. And, you know, if you think about tennis, the goal is to win the game, right? But there's so many ways that you can win in so many game styles. You've got your serve and volley guys. You've got your guys who play from the baseline. You've got guys who are just like Leighton Hewitt, a complete scrambler, goes for everything, right? And even though the goal is the same, the way to win is very much dependent on the skill set and the strengths of the player themselves. So, yeah, it's, I think, defining outcomes that we want, but then helping people understand what strengths do they bring to the table to help achieve the outcome is actually really important.
Yeah, and in addition, understanding that everyone is different, and it's not to say that something is right or wrong, you know, but just trying to appreciate those superpowers that each of us bring to a different situation or a different scenario and leveraging those for the ultimate best result for everyone all round.
Yeah, no, in agreement there.
So what changes would you love to see happen in workplaces as a result of people reading your book?
What changes would I love to see? I would love people to realise that it is possible to think about what really lights you up when it comes to career or work or whatever it is that you're doing, and that it doesn't have to be an or. So, you know, you don't have to think, oh, you know, maybe I like this, this and this, or these are my values, but gosh, there's no way I could ever work in that type of environment or area. And for people to understand that it's absolutely possible for them. And secondarily, that leaders can think about what it would take for them to build an environment if they truly understood what purposeful leadership meant, that they could design the most brilliant and amazing working environments for their teams, if only they took that little bit of time to understand their people and what drove them.
I think that would be a marvellous improvement on the world of work overall.
Nice. Well, it's been a fantastic conversation with you today, Megan. A question that we do like to ask all of our guests at this stage of the podcast, however, is if you were to think about the future, what would your hopes for the future of workplace mental health be?
These are really great questions. Now I want to go and hear what other people said, and I'll try and answer it for myself.
Yeah, well, we've got about 200 examples in the in the history of the podcast. So.
Yeah. My hope is truly that people have the opportunity to live a life which includes their career, where they can feel so fulfilled with what they're doing that it fills their cup, and that every day that it brings them, the happiness that they were looking for. And I know this is not a happiness podcast or anything like that, but I reflect back on to those days myself and those, career opportunities that I had, where it felt like I was making a difference in the world. And especially, because I've worked for these big companies, you often feel like you're doing that just because of the scope and scale of the work. And my hope is that people get to feel that way, so that the days that they do go to work, are just some of the happiest days of their life, rather than some of the most difficult days of their lives. Oh, there's a soap, Days of Our Lives.
All right, and a final question for you today, Megan. Do you have any words of advice for listeners who want to work in the field of psychosocial safety?
Yeah, first of all, I would take my hats off to you and encourage you to do it. I mentioned earlier that I've been working in health and safety for 31 years. And, I always remember people saying to parents, because I'm a parent of 3, what do they say? The days are long, but the years are short. And it's often only after all of those years that you realise the legacy that you've left behind. And I think if people go into the field of psychosocial health and safety now, I don't even know whether we realise the positive impact that I believe it's going to have on people and the world if we can focus on it and focus on people. And so I would just applaud anyone who wants to go into the field, to make this, I've said it before, but, to make this world a better place. Because the health and safety profession, the broader health and safety profession, looking at physical hazards or chemical hazards or whatever it was for all those years, has made an enormous difference to people's lives all across the world. And this feels like now, with this increased focus on psychosocial health and safety, that it's an opportunity to do such enormous goodness for people. And so my hope is that more people explore the profession and really focus on what they can do to make a difference.
Thank you, Megan.
Well, Megan, it has been a terrific conversation with you today. When does your book come out?
It comes out in September. It's available for pre-order in August, but it actually comes out in September this year.
Yeah, well, this episode probably will come out around August anyway,
Yep.
So we'll be able to put a link to the pre-order, if not the full order, depending on when it comes out.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be great. But Megan, thank you for joining us and staying up late in Seattle to share with us about your book. It sounds fascinating. I'll definitely be getting on the pre-order list once it comes out. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks, Joelle.
Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, we do record these over video when we have our guests on, and you can catch those videos on the Flourish DX YouTube channel. We also take snippets, the best of the best bits of these conversations, and put them on the Flourish DX LinkedIn page. So do follow along there. And while you're on LinkedIn, if you want to connect with Joelle and myself to continue the conversation, we frequent there probably way too much. Probably could be doing more productive things with our time, but
Yeah.
we're generally fairly responsive, so feel free to reach out. But that's it for today. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychhealthandsafety.com.